The grand ballroom of the Blackwood estate glowed under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, their golden light dancing over marble floors polished to perfection. Musicians tuned their instruments in the corner, filling the air with elegant strings that floated among the guests like whispers of a fairy tale. Every detail of the day had been orchestrated to scream luxury: roses flown in from Italy, a gown designed in Paris, and a guest list peppered with royals, politicians, and titans of business. Adrian Blackwood stood near the altar, tall and composed, his black tuxedo cut sharply against his broad frame. On his face rested a mask of calm confidence, the same mask he wore in boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. But inside, his thoughts were strangely muted. Marriage to Cassandra Kingsley was not a matter of love, it was a merger, a perfect alignment of power and reputation. She was stunning, graceful, and admired by everyone, but when Adrian looked at her, he didn't feel the fire he had once known. He brushed the thought away. Today was not about fire. Today was about legacy. Behind the curtains separating the grand dining hall from the reception area, the catering team bustled. Waiters carried silver trays stacked with hors d'oeuvres, while chefs shouted instructions above the clatter of pans. Adrian had no reason to glance toward them. His world existed at the altar, in the glow of the cameras flashing, in the murmur of guests waiting for the ceremony to begin. Yet something, a pull he couldn't name, dragged his eyes toward the kitchen doors. At first, all he saw was the staff in their crisp uniforms moving like clockwork. But then, one figure stepped into the light. A woman. She pushed back the brim of her chef's hat, tucking a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, and in that instant, time seemed to still. Adrian's breath caught. His chest tightened with recognition so sudden, so sharp, that it nearly unsteadied him. Elena. The name roared through him like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered. He hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since the night he walked away, choosing ambition over love, wealth over the quiet life she dreamed of. He thought she had disappeared, gone back to the shadows of the small-town world he left behind. But here she was, in his home, at his wedding, dressed in a chef's uniform with flour dusting her hands. He froze, unable to look away. Her movements were deliberate, graceful but firm as she gave instructions to the junior staff. She didn't see him at first, and perhaps that was a blessing. Adrian's mind raced, colliding with memories he had buried, the warmth of her laughter, the fire in her eyes when she challenged him, the softness of her touch. He remembered the promises he had made to her, promises broken the moment he chose a different path. Then she looked up, her gaze met his across the expanse of the room. Her eyes, still the same deep hazel that once undid him, widened just a fraction before hardening into steel. She didn't gasp, didn't falter. Instead, she squared her shoulders and turned away, as though he were no more significant than the flicker of a candle in the corner. But the blow landed all the same. And then Adrian saw them. 2 children hovered near Elena, tucked just behind the doorway. A boy, no older than 10, with dark hair that curled at the edges, and a girl, perhaps 8, with wide curious eyes. They carried small baskets of napkins and utensils, clearly helping their mother. The boy laughed softly at something his sister whispered, and the sound was so familiar it sent a chill down Adrian's spine. His heart slammed against his ribs. The boy's jawline, the girl's stubborn little chin, echoes of himself flashed in their features. No, it couldn't be. Adrian gripped the edge of the table beside him, steadying himself as 1,000 questions burned in his mind. Why was she here? Why had fate brought Elena, of all people, into this carefully curated day of perfection? And those children, his bride, Cassandra, touched his arm lightly, pulling him back to the moment. "Are you all right?" she whispered, her smile fixed for the watching guests. Adrian forced his composure, nodding, though his throat was tight. "Yes, just the nerves," he said, but his eyes betrayed him, sliding once more toward the kitchen where Elena disappeared with her children. For the first time in years, Adrian Blackwood, the billionaire who had everything, felt the ground beneath him shift. The life he had built, the image he had cultivated, all of it suddenly seemed fragile, balanced on the return of one woman from his past and the 2 little shadows who followed her. And as the music swelled and the ceremony began, Adrian's mind wasn't on Cassandra, wasn't on the vows or the empire this marriage would cement. It was on Elena, on the unspoken history between them, on the children who might very well be his. The perfect wedding had just become the most dangerous day of his life. The ceremony had ended in a haze of vows, applause, and flashing cameras, but Adrian's mind was elsewhere. He hardly remembered slipping the ring onto Cassandra's finger, or the way she leaned in for the kiss that sealed their union. To him, it was all background noise. His eyes had searched the crowd, the corners of the hall, always drifting back toward the doors that led to the kitchen. When the guests moved into the reception hall, the lavish feast awaited them, tables lined with gilded candelabras, champagne towers glittering under the chandeliers, and platters of delicacies that had cost more than some people earned in a year. Everyone admired the spread, unaware that the chef behind it was more than a hired professional. Adrian excused himself from Cassandra's side under the guise of needing a moment alone. He moved quickly, his polished shoes clicking against the marble as he slipped past waiters and slipped through the swinging doors. The air inside the kitchen was warmer, filled with the aromas of roasted meats, fresh herbs, and baked bread. Pots clattered, orders were called, but the noise seemed to dull as his gaze found her. Elena. She was bent over a counter, arranging garnishes on a tray with precise, steady hands. The years had changed her, but only to sharpen the strength already within her. Her hair, darker now, was tied back in a simple knot. Fine lines traced the corners of her eyes, but they did not lessen her beauty. They told a story of survival, of sleepless nights and sacrifices made. "Why are you here?" The words slipped from him before he could stop them. Her head lifted slowly, and those hazel eyes locked onto his again. For a heartbeat, silence stretched, thick with the ghosts of their past. Then she set the tray down with a calmness that felt like defiance. "I'm working," she said evenly. "That's what people like me do. We work." His jaw tightened. "You knew this was my wedding." Her lips curved, not into a smile but something sharper. "Believe me, if I had a choice, I wouldn't be anywhere near it. But this job feeds my children. And not everyone can afford to walk away from responsibility." The words stung. Responsibility. He had once promised her the world, then left with nothing but ambition in his hands. His eyes flicked toward the corner where the children had been earlier, but they weren't there now. "They're yours, aren't they?" His voice was lower now, rough with the question that had burned in him since the moment he saw them. Elena's expression didn't falter. She picked up another tray and handed it to a waiter without looking at Adrian. Only then did she answer, her voice quiet but cutting. "They're mine. That's all you need to know." The words struck deeper than any blade. He wanted to demand, to argue, to claim the right he had long forfeited. But standing there, watching her straighten her back with pride, Adrian realized he was no longer the man who had power over her life. In that kitchen, Elena was the one in control, and Adrian was just the ghost of a past she had already survived. The reception hall glittered with opulence, every corner designed to impress. Guests raised their glasses, laughter mingled with the notes of a string quartet, and Cassandra floated among them like the perfect bride, her hand brushing Adrian's arm as though to remind him that he was hers. Yet his mind was locked in the kitchen, on Elena's words, on the children's faces that would not leave him. He tried to focus. Cassandra's father was making a toast, his booming voice echoing through the grand room about the power of two dynasties uniting. Guests clapped, glasses chimed, but Adrian's throat was dry. His eyes wandered, and once again, he saw her, Elena, moving quietly near the buffet, instructing her staff. She was supposed to be invisible, but to Adrian she shone brighter than the chandeliers. Cassandra followed his gaze. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she leaned closer, her whisper sharp. "Why do you keep looking at the help?" Adrian stiffened, forcing his face into polite composure. "No reason." But Cassandra's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering. She excused herself gracefully from the group, her smile never breaking, and turned back to Adrian once they were a step away from the crowd. "Don't lie to me. Who is she?" The question hit harder than he expected. He opened his mouth, then closed it. To lie would be easy, but Elena's presence had already shredded the fragile illusion of this day. Finally, his voice came, low and strained. "She's someone I used to know." Cassandra's brows arched. "Someone you used to know? Or someone you loved?" The air around them seemed to thin. Guests began to glance in their direction, sensing the tension. Adrian tried to step away, but Cassandra caught his wrist, her grip deceptively delicate. "Answer me," she demanded, her whisper now edged with panic. Before he could, a small voice broke through the hum of chatter. "Mommy, is that man our daddy?" The room fell silent. The words came from near the buffet table, where Elena's children had wandered out, their innocent eyes fixed on Adrian. The boy's voice carried across the hall, clear and unafraid. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Adrian's blood ran cold. Every eye in the room turned to him, then to Cassandra, then to Elena, who froze, her face draining of color. She rushed forward, kneeling beside her children, whispering for them to hush. But it was too late. The truth, Or at least the suspicion of it, hung heavy in the air. Cassandra's hand slipped from Adrian's wrist as though burned. Her face flushed with fury and humiliation. "Is it true?" she hissed, no longer caring who heard. Adrian couldn't speak. His silence was damning enough. The empire he had so carefully constructed, this marriage, this image of perfection, was crumbling in front of hundreds of witnesses. And in the center of it all stood Elena, the woman he had once loved, the children who might be his, and the truth he could no longer ignore. The silence in the hall was suffocating. 100 pairs of eyes bore into Adrian, waiting for him to deny it, to laugh off the boy's innocent question. Cassandra stood rigid beside him, her diamond bracelet glittering as her fists clenched at her sides. Her perfect smile was gone, replaced by a mask of rage and humiliation. Elena tried to guide her children away, whispering frantically for them to stay quiet, but the boy tugged against her hand. His wide, earnest eyes looked straight at Adrian. "Why won't he say anything, Mommy? Isn't he our dad?" The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. He stepped forward instinctively, his heart pounding in his ears. The resemblance, the familiarity in their eyes, it was undeniable. He had spent years burying his past, convincing himself he had made the right choice. But standing there, with the truth laid bare by a child's voice, he knew everything he had built was hollow. Cassandra's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "So it's true," she laughed bitterly, though the sound was brittle. "On our wedding day, of all days, I find out my husband has a secret family with a chef." How poetic. Her words sent a murmur through the crowd, scandal igniting like wildfire among the guests. Cameras clicked, phones lifted, whispers hissed in every corner of the room. Adrian felt the weight of it pressing down on him, the reputation, the empire, the dynasty he was supposed to uphold. But none of it mattered compared to the two small faces staring up at him. "Elena," he said, his voice rough, almost pleading. "Are they mine?" Her lips trembled, but her eyes held steady. "Does it matter now?" she whispered. "You left me when I needed you. You don't get to choose when you're part of their lives." Cassandra's eyes blazed, her pride splintered. She yanked the ring from her finger and hurled it at Adrian's chest. "We're finished. Do whatever you want with your past, but don't you dare think you can have both me and your little secrets." Without another word, she stormed from the hall, her family and a cluster of guests rushing after her. The grand reception, meant to be the pinnacle of luxury and power, lay in shambles. Guests whispered openly now, some watching with pity, others with hungry curiosity. Adrian barely noticed. He stepped toward Elena and knelt down, lowering himself to eye level with the children. His voice softened in a way it hadn't in years. "I don't know if I deserve to be called your father. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try." The little girl tilted her head, studying him, while the boy clutched his mother's hand tightly. Elena's eyes filled with tears she fought to hide. For years she had carried the burden alone, and now here he was, offering words she wasn't sure she could trust. She drew in a shaky breath. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Adrian. They've had enough of that." Adrian nodded slowly, his gaze steady on hers. "Then I won't promise. I'll prove it." The hall was still buzzing with scandal, but in that moment, for Adrian, the world had narrowed to just the three of them. The empire, the wealth, the image, it was all dust compared to the fragile hope flickering in Elena's eyes and the innocence shining in the children's. For the first time in years, Adrian Blackwood felt like he had something worth fighting for.